Gatekeeper, open the portals between the gods and mortals. Power freely flows as our magic grows.
O Bridget, our heart, O brightest queen, cast your blessings unto us. We are your children, and you are our mother, so hearken unto us. You are the cauldron now in our grove, wise woman, inspire us. O fire of love, O fire of life, please, Bridget, come to us. Bridget, we offer you whiskey. Accept our offering.
Accept our offering.
I'm Arin.
And I'm Jonathan.
And you're listening to Part the Mist,
a podcast by a pair of ADF druids here in Portland, Oregon.
And we have a special episode today, brought to you today. We're recording at Trout Lake Abbey again, and we're going to be talking a little bit about the Celtic Hearth Culture, which is why I opted to start out with Bridget as our deity of the quote-unquote occasion. Wanting to pick out a Celtic deity, and Bridget's pretty well known. We also have Amber here, and Amber's actually a follower, Bridget, so would you like to share a little bit
Sure.
about her?
A little bit about Bridget, that I'm actually quite happy that you guys chose her to make offering to this time, is because, yeah, you're correct. Bridget is very well known and very relatable to a lot of individuals, considering Bridget being the Celtic goddess and then Bridget being incorporated into sainthood. So you can still go to Ireland and go to places in her honor as a saint and understand her history as well. It's been a really fun journey for myself, seeing her as a triple goddess and seeing her multiple different sides. She's a goddess of healing, a goddess of smith work, and a goddess of poetry and inspiration. So we call upon her at a lot of our high days for inspiration specifically, and then we honor her at our Imbolc as well.
So I personally, I don't feel like we have a whole lot to talk about in regards to what this episode is about, because that seems like a perfect kind of introduction into our topic today. We're going to be, like I said, we're going to be talking about the Celtic Hearth Culture. It's one of the 4 hearth cultures that Columbia Grove follows personally. We have, I think, 3 Celtic rituals, 2 Hellenic rituals, 2 Norse rituals, and until next year, 1 Roman ritual. We'll be introducing a new ritual next year. But
can I jump in here
yes,
really quickly?
Yes.
I did want to talk a bit about this one point. You keep referring to the Celtic Hearth Culture, and there really isn't a Celtic Hearth Culture. The Celtic nations as they currently exist are Ireland, Scotland, Wales, Cornwall, and Brittany in northern France. And each one is actually fairly different, some more similar than others, but they're all fairly different. And so in ADF, it's better if most people, when they say Celtic, mean Irish.
Yes.
Okay. And Scottish is similar, but not the same. Welsh is very different. I don't know a whole lot about the Cornish. There isn't much left for them. And the Bretons as well. There's a lot of early medieval Christian stuff from the Bretons. But so instead of saying Celtic, why don't we say Irish or Welsh?
Yes.
In this particular case.
Yes, I should clarify that our grove follows an Irish hearth culture.
Got it. Irish Gaelic.
So yes.
On our event pages and stuff, we do always say Irish, Celtic, Beltane.
And I'm usually better at saying that, so thank you for catching me on that, Kirk.
Everybody does it. It's real common.
We don't have a whole lot of information on the Celtic Hearth Culture. I think this is actually someplace where Jonathan can jump in here.
What?
If Jonathan's paying attention.
I am paying attention.
Because what information we do have is largely actually from the Romans.
It was a couple people who went wandering around to categorize and take the history of the people around, from my understanding. And of course, it's completely biased. I mean, you're coming from a people whose their context of their universe, their cosmos, was very different than the Gauls and their cosmos. So you would always read a lot about, so their god is this, or Tranus is Jupiter.
Yeah.
Because that's the best way that they could portray that information back to the Roman people, other than say, this god is a this. So yes, that is the most information we have from Romans, because obviously they didn't write anything down.
Right.
And there's a lot of speculation why they didn't, but yeah.
And there's a lot of really good books out there. I know one of the things that I read was, the Irish had a written language. They had the Ogham, but that was used more for, like, just recording. The Druids did not believe in writing down the religious information, right?
It had to be memorized.
Right.
Because if you wrote it down, then you wouldn't need to memorize. And if you couldn't memorize, how could you be extemporaneous?
Right.
It was all about internalization.
Mm-hmm.
And Caesar said it took 20 years in Ireland to learn how to do all this. Yes, the Romans tended to call all foreign gods by the names of their own gods because they thought they might be similar. For instance, Caesar pointed out that the most important god of the Gauls was Mercury.
Mm-hmm.
Now, who is that in the Celtic? Is it Lugos? Possibly. Who in Irish becomes Lughnasadh.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to say. We don't really know.
Mm-hmm.
The Romans weren't that clear.
Just to clarify, because I'm curious, your preferred hearth culture is actually Welsh, isn't it?
Yes, but I do as much Irish as I do Welsh.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I can pronounce Welsh, and I have a horrible time with Irish. Why use one letter when 10 will do?
Vowels.
They just have silent letters everywhere.
I don't understand what vowels are for. It doesn't make sense.
Oh. All right, let's talk about what we do know and what we definitely don't know. And I'm going to first talk about Gaulish, then I want to go to Irish, then I want to go to Welsh, because that's sort of in historical precedence, okay? Okay, if we look at the Gaulish stuff, all that we have is what a bunch of Roman and or Greek writers wrote about it. Mm-hmm. And then once the conquest took place, they started doing carvings of deity images, and they started doing some name writing. And from that, we have a rough idea of how the religion worked, but it's very rough. Archaeology has also helped with this, by the way. We have found sanctuaries in Gaul that have been excavated, and apparently the offerings were made to pits, although there is one suggestive platform that could have had a fire to carry things to celestial deities, maybe. Bruno speculates on this, but we don't know that for sure. But we know they offered to pits. They have found blood remains, as it were, when they do microscopic tests of stuff, of soil at the base of these pits around spiky posts that things may have been thrown onto or whatever. The cult of the head probably shows up pretty strongly here, in that if you go to Entremont, which is an archaeological site in the south of France, where they actually worked in stone, obviously influenced by the Greeks, who were in Marsala, modern Marseille, very nearby. They built these stone pillars that had niches carved in them, and in these niches were placed skulls. Now, archaeologists speculate that the cult of the head was all about the head being the repository of the soul. I mean, when you think about it, it sort of makes sense. When we think our vision, etc., we kind of live in our heads, right? Mm-hmm. So that seems like a logical place to put it. The heads were often depicted in art. In fact, on my ritual belt, I've got all those Latin period silver heads on it, because I just thought that was super cool. And the head hunting idea shows up in the Irish as well, in some of the earlier stuff. So we know what the Greeks and the Romans wrote about them. When we get to Ireland, everything was written by Christian monks. Mm-hmm. In Search of the Irish Dreamtime is a book that's just come out by, help me, what's his name? J.P. Mallory, good old Mallory, our friend Mallory. Yeah. And in it, he essentially continues the debunking of the idea that what we have is what the ancient pagans believed. I haven't read the book yet. I read a very strong review about it in an archaeological magazine. And I know what he's referring to, because I've read some of the other articles. For instance, the Toyne, the cattle raid of Cooley, mm-hmm. that Cahulan tale. For a long time, people believed that it was a description of Iron Age Irish society. And indeed, there are things in there that probably are. But all the descriptions of things like swords and like that are obviously medieval, obviously from the Christian era. And so we have to take a lot of this with a grain of salt. If you look at the Labor Gabala Eren, which is the tales of the history of Ireland, what the monks did is they tried to take the lore they had from the various kingdoms, pagan kingdoms, until that time, in Ireland, and then they tried to slot it into a biblical narrative so that everybody could be descended from Noah. And it's frankly absurd. But that's what we've got. Now, there's a lot of details that come out in here that we have sort of assumed probably are ancient. There are these descriptions of the gods, in fact, in glossary. In Cormac's glossary, he does list a lot of things about various and sundry gods. And that may be based on the lore. That may be on old memory stuff, because they're gods, and the Christians wouldn't necessarily want to preserve that sort of thing. Except in Ireland, Christianity was different. It wasn't Roman Christianity, at least not right away. Patrick brought that. But before that, it was monastic Christianity by a bunch of Irish people who were proud of their past. And so they preserved more than most cultures did. And so when we have that. But you still, everything you read, you kind of have to take with a grain of salt. And this is a theme that Morgan Daimler on Facebook has been sort of pounding periodically. But it's good. Now you look at the Welsh stuff, and we're talking the Mabinogi. And the Mabinogi is 13th century, maybe that old. And that's really, really late. And it's been obviously Christianized. There are 4 branches, 4 main tales of the Mabinogi, right? And most of the scholarly stuff I've read says that the 4th branch, the one about Lleslau Guffus and Gwydion and Blodeath, the Lady of the Flowers, and her betrayal of him, and when he's stabbed by her boyfriend, he turns into an eagle and flies away. That whole thing, that tale probably holds more pagan information in it than the other 3. Although I always wonder about Rhiannon. She's so obviously magical. How could that not be a holdover? But I don't know that. So we just sort of have to accept that we don't really know. And that's where UPG comes in.
Right.
I hate to say it.
And UPG, I'm not sure if that's a term we've used on the podcast before. That stands for...
Unverifiable personal gnosis. In other words, the gods told me.
Yes.
We didn't find it in the writings of Pliny. We didn't find it in Caesar's writings, and the archaeologists haven't found this yet. In other words, we're making it up.
Yes. Yeah, and I know a lot of what we use modernly, like I know that there's no evidence of like 8 high days within Irish.
Oh no!
Within Irish culture,
No.
and that tends to be stuff that we kind of get more from Wicca actually.
It also makes it challenging for those ADFers who are going through the Dedicant path and following the Irish Celtic Hearth Culture. You hit the fire festivals and then you try to hit the others, and you got to go to Welsh or something else.
Yeah. Well, we don't know. We are aware of the 4 Irish high days of, Imbolc, Beltane, Lughnasadh, and Samhain. But those are probably the royal holidays of Tara. Right. That doesn't mean that they didn't celebrate other things elsewhere. Those were the 4 royal ones. So for all we know, the solstices and equinoxes could have been celebrated. There just is no record of it.
So when you mean by the royal ones, you mean that only the kings and stuff could go, essentially?
Well, not that they could only go, but that they were paid to have those holidays celebrated, and they celebrated them for the entire nation. If there was an overking. The overking seemed to be more of a religious position than a political one until the Middle Ages.
And Kirk mentioned that they were held on Tara, which the Hill of Tara is a very holy, in my personal opinion, is a very holy place in Ireland, known to be the seat of the quote-unquote High Kings of Ireland.
In ancient days, that was probably, as I said, a religious more than a political thing, because all the kingdoms were constantly at war with each other. Right.
There
are lots of holy places in Ireland, lots and lots of them.
Yes.
Tara is just, the Hill of Tara is one of the special ones.
Well, I know for me, actually, I think my visit to Tara was the place where I realized I was pagan for the first time. When I had a she tap me on the back of the head.
Okay.
I like that side look there.
Yeah.
It's okay, Arin. It's okay.
All right. Well, we're getting into it. But anyway, days actually is more of a modern thing, is it not?
Oh, absolutely.
And
the modern wheel of the year was invented, in the 60s? Ross Nichols and somebody.
Joe Gardner.
Well, I've heard that, and I've heard it with somebody else, too. So I'm not sure who it
Yes.
was. But anyway, Ross is the one who insisted on having the solstices and equinoxes.
So celebrating the Irish hearth culture in the modern era, I don't know, that's not something that can really be seen as more as a commonplace thing, though, is it? I think everybody kind of has their own thing these days.
Well, I do find it interesting, like our grove, we very obviously only honor the fire festivals.
Yes.
We have Imbolc, we have Beltane, we have Lughnasadh.
Yes.
We don't do Samhain, that's our Roman ancestor ritual, but we don't focus on Irish for any of the others. That's where we go to Greek and we go to Norse. And I know that works well for us, but we also honor multiple cultures.
I know Stone Creed, which is our oldest grove, does the 4 Irish ones, and then the other 4 they do Norse.
Okay.
It seems to be a mixture that a lot of people like. I tend to scatter them around myself. But yes, why not?
So I think we should probably, we talked about the history. What about like modern practice? How do people honor? Let's use the Irish Celtic for instance. What does an Irish practice look like, opposed to something that's this more more eclectic?
Well, from my experience with a mixed pagan community, I see a lot of, just Celtic symbols, a lot of deity worship, but it's not always sometimes it can be scholarly based, and then other times it's a little bit more eclectic, it's a little bit more out and in the interpretation of the individual. I know that when we go to like Pagan Pride, I can find triskells on things. I can find, pictures of Bridget, and I love that we have those available to us. I know that within ADF and our grove, we try to honor the deities with as much respect as possible to the historical knowings. But
of who they were, at least as far as we can tell.
Yeah.
That does tend to do that. I mean, I think people doing an Irish culture tend to honor Lughnasadh in some way, or the Samhainach in some way at Lughnasadh. Samhain is ancestors and the dead, and a lot of groves call on Doida and on Morrigan because of the whole thing at the River Eunice before the Battle of Moytura.
Yep.
That's what I do. Let's see.
Lots and lots of whiskey
Lots
offerings.
of whiskey.
Yes.
Irish whiskey everywhere.
Yes. And Imbolc tends to be for Brige, and we do it publicly because ADF does that. That's what we do. But Imbolc really is more of a family-oriented holiday that you would do in the home. It really, that's nasty time of year. Nasty time of year in Ireland as well as here. And of course, Beltane, some people call upon Belanus. I do that one in Welsh myself. But, people call upon the sun. It's all about maybe the land spirits and the, hooray, it's the 1st of May, outdoor fucking begins today.
Yes, take time.
Well, make a note to make explicit note on this one.
I can always say it again and clean it up.
Jonathan Cole.
No, that's okay. One bad word's not going to get us.
Yeah,
We do have to
Ian
make sure
says that all the
gratitude.
time. That's where I got that from.
Yeah.
But I think that's an old standard Wiccan trope or something. I don't know.
I know we celebrate nature spirits for Beltane, but we try to keep it very family oriented.
Yes, right. Yeah. Well, try explaining what the holiday's about when you got a whole bunch of, like I did that one year, all those those teenage girls came from a local church
Oh.
to watch, and I'm sitting there trying to explain it's the In-N-Out holiday, you know.
Oh, that's a challenge. I do love that our Emil, not this most recent year, but the year before, we had quite a few children, and we have a playground right behind our grove area, and children are running around, and the adults are trying to meditate, and the kids are just having a blast, and I'm sitting there laughing to myself, being like, oh, well, you know, family holiday.
That's it.
We would have you know, that'd be okay.
That's right. Lactation of the ewes. Spring is coming. Lay your hand upon the ice of the river that it will break. Something like that. I'm going to yell at it.
But yeah, like Amber was saying, it's a lot of whiskey offerings.
Well, food and drink were traditional offerings in the
yes.
ancient days.
And
And precious metals, swords as well.
We do a lot of bread making for our high days, an offering of a lot of different breads and corn dolls.
Oh, it was beautiful for Lughnasadh, and I know we talked about this on our last episode, but David did this beautiful braided bread that we offered to Tiaochu, and it was gorgeous.
Wonderful.
So maybe since we've kind of touched bases a little bit, because obviously we can't go into deep conversation because that would take hours.
Yeah.
And I know you, Kirk, have a whole workshop on the Celtic Hearth Culture, quote unquote Celtic Hearth Culture. But that's like an hour long. So unfortunately we can't do that here. But let's say somebody
ancient Celtic religion.
There you go. There you go.
Now you're going, what? It's essentially Gaulish with a little bit of Irish mixed in, yeah.
So say somebody who wants to start out, who are drawn to the Irish or Gaulish. So some resources for those starting out in, let's say, the Irish hearth culture. What's kind of some good resources to get somebody started out in this, or some recommendations, that sort of thing?
You're going to want to do some reading so that you know what you're doing. The Pagan Portals series of books is a really good beginner's thing. Don't you agree?
I absolutely agree.
Yeah. Morgan Daimler and others have been writing. In fact, I think, has it come out, or it's any moment now, she's doing one on the Irish gods.
I think it's out.
Is it out?
I think it's
Well,
out.
I know she got her copy, but
I could be wrong.
Well, I pre-ordered it and it hasn't come yet. But there's that one. Then there's one on Bridget. There's one on the Morrigan. Women seem to write all these, and no one ever does them on the male gods yet. But yes, that's a really good place to start because they're very readable.
Mm-hmm.
They're not written in a college level, but generally they're not written in that sort of a high level, so anybody can access them. I think that I'd start with Pagan Portals. That's a really good place. Now, if you want to get into it deep,
anthropological texts.
There's Labor Gabala Arin, there's the Calorate of Cooley, the Twain, spelled Tain. You can get things like that.
I still mispronounce that one pretty much every single time.
Yeah.
Tain, Toyin.
Toyin. And I'm probably mispronouncing it too. Who knows? I hate to admit this, but Ian originally wrote it, so that explains it, that the ADF Dedekind Path book, Our Own Druidry, is pretty darned Irish. It's got a lot of Irish stuff and some Irish prayers and things in it. That's a good thing. You can do that as well.
I love that we have resources like YouTube available because there's been a lot of chants and songs that have been written for Irish deities.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes that can be a good connection for people to find guided meditations or songs and chants. Especially for those that might not be quite willing or ready yet to dive into a lot of extensive research and stuff. You can get a good connection to music and stuff.
Well, and there are a lot of people who just simply don't want to read.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to probably be recording my book to, so you can listen to it in the car. Yeah. Oh, God.
That's why we have things like the podcast.
That's right.
Yes.
Well, that's what it's for. It's people are busy, and they have long commutes, and you can listen to stuff in the car. I know a lot of people who do that, and so that's probably the way we all need to push in the future to make this all more accessible, is to start doing it orally. Like the ancients did.
Exactly. We have many different senses, not just one.
That's right. That's right. And as you get older, your eyes kind of get a little funny anyway.
So we get a lot of questions at our ritual about who were the Druids, And I know this is a huge, I know, everyone's rolling their eyes, I know, but for those who don't know, can you give us a little bit of a history? I mean, just kind of...
Very quickly. In all the various Celtic cultures, the Druids were apparently the class of people who were in charge of religion primarily, and those things that are attached to religion, like justice, for instance, like judicial things. And they were scientists, as far as one could be in those days. They were the most learned people in the culture. And in ancient Gaul, which is modern France, but back in ancient Gaul, they were gaining considerable power, not so much that they could command armies or anything. It's just that they were seen as sacred, and a druid could stand between two opposing armies and forbid a battle, and they would listen to him. They had the power to deny someone the sacrifices, which is essentially saying, you are now exiled from the community. And exile in those days could mean death, simply because how are you going to survive without community? Mm-hmm. They were quite powerful, and that is why the Romans had to exterminate them all. Because in their conquest of Gaul, they found out that the glue that was holding Gaulish society together, all these warring tribes, were the Druids. Now, in Ireland, from what we can tell, I mean, the Druids existed even into the Christian era. But if you look at the price that would have to be paid to someone for damaging them, the Druids' price just kept getting lower and lower and lower and lower until finally they were essentially outlawed. And their place was taken by the Fili, who are the bards. You know, that whole barding part. Caesar said that there were three kinds of Druids. There was the bards, essentially. There were the sacrificers, and there were the diviners, those who did divination, who found the will of the gods. So those were three separate functions, which were very important. What else?
So how would you see today's Druids versus the ones in ancient?
Yes, well, we're not an elite like they were. They were an elite, like the Flamans in Rome and the Brahmins in India, all the same root, by the way, root word. Mm-hmm. Whereas modern Druids, we just want to follow these hearth cultures. We want to do Indo-European things, and anybody can call themselves a Druid. Mm-hmm. You don't have to earn the right to call yourself a Druid. Well, yeah. Well, join ADF, you're a Druid.
Yeah. No white robes required.
No. Although white was the color of the priest class. Yes. Just saying.
Yeah.
So we're more kind of repurposing the name for ourselves.
Exactly.
So could you give us a tiny little insight look into why white and mistletoe and the sickle are Druid things?
Oh, right. Yes, absolutely. That's one of the only Druid ritual that we actually know about from the ancient world. Pliny I believe it was Pliny the Elder, who in his natural history wrote about a Druid rite where they would want to gather the mistletoe that grew in an oak tree, because it was very rare for mistletoe to grow in an oak tree. It grew in other trees just fine, but in oak, it was rare. And it was believed to have magical curative properties for things. And the ritual was that they would spread a white cloth under the oak tree where the mistletoe was. They would sacrifice 2 white bulls, and then a white-robed Druid, they're all in white. One of them would climb into the tree with a golden sickle and cut the mistletoe from the tree, and it would fall upon the white cloth because it wasn't allowed to touch the earth. And that's the only ritual we know of. So from there we get mistletoe, we get white robes, and we get sickles. Mm-hmm.
Now,
golden
which one's
sickles.
The poison mistletoe? The English or the American?
American.
Okay.
Yeah. Don't go cutting mistletoe out of your tree in the United States or Canada, please. Just don't do it. Well, you can do it, but just don't eat it.
Don't eat it. No teas.
No teas. No. Bad.
So if we're done, I have one final request. You've said a lot of names, a lot of Irish and Welsh names. Can you say something in Welsh for us?
All right. It's a little blessing. Badr benditiana duiai, ar anaviaid, ar ysbryd yn y natur, ar nomni. May the gods, ancestors, and nature spirits bless us all.
Gorgeous. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, that's going to wrap us up for today for our Irish Celtic discussion. Stay tuned for some more of that going on later. And after our song, you're going to hear from our interview with Reverend William Ashton that was recorded at the Beyond the Gates festival.
Feed the flames and set them dancing. Hail the sun and hail to life. Feed the flames and set them dancing. Hail the sun and hail to life. Spear of fire burns so brightly as the sun wheel in the sky. Spear of fire burn within me. O Liu Norsha, O Lughnasadh.
Ohi Unosha, Ohi Lughnasadh.
Hi, I'm Reverend William Ashton, and you're listening to Part the Mist, a Druid podcast created and hosted by the members of Columbia ADF.
All right, hello, and I am here with Reverend William Ashton from Mountain Ancestors Grove.
That's us.
Yes, exactly. So, do you mind go ahead and introducing yourself? Tell us, I guess, how you started off in paganism.
Great. Well, I have a lot of martial arts background, interestingly enough, and I was looking for ways to make extra money using some of my martial arts skills. So I got some little business cards made and started posting them in coffee shops around New Orleans, which is where I'm from. And, various and sundry people would call me up for private lessons and things like this, wanting to learn whatnot. And this fella named Russ, actually he's a published author now. He's a pretty cool guy. His name's Russ Viola. If you find any of his work, please read it. He's my shameless plug for my friend Russ. But Russ calls me up, and we didn't know one another at the time. And he said, I'm very interested in working with you. And I said, okay, that's great. And at the time, I was in between religions. I think we'll end up getting to a piece of that later, perhaps. But Russ says, I work for Walden Books. This is back when they had bookstores and malls and things, right? So Russ says, I can either pay you your fee in cash, which is X amount, or since I get 50% off of all books, I can give you that same value, X times 2, in books. And I'm a bibliophile, so I was like, I'll take the books. So I soon burned through. I worked with Russ for a little over a year, and every now and again I would go into Walden Books and we'd chat, and I'd pull a stack of books, and as he would get paid, I would get big stacks of books. So I burned through all the interesting stuff that I wanted to read about different kinds of Japanese martial arts, and then it was Eastern philosophies and Eastern religions and things like this, and I was just out of things to read that I found interesting at the time. And then I was walking along, and I passed Raymond Buckland's Big Blue Book of witchcraft, right? And I said, come on, I grew up Catholic, and I was away from my family for quite some time by the point in history that this came to be. And so I pulled the book off the shelf and put it in with the stack. I got like Suzuki Roshi's Zen books and all this other stuff. And then on the bottom, I had this, Buckland's Big Blue Book. And Russ looks at me, he's going through the books. He's like, okay. And he picks up Buckland's book and he's like, why do you have this? And I'm like, I don't know, man. It just looked interesting. And he's like, He goes, would you like this sooner rather than later, or would you like it in this order? And I'm like, well, I'll take it, sooner rather than later. And he said, okay. And just kind of gave me this real squirrely look. And so about a week later, I end up with this copy of Buckland's Big Blue Book. And he's like, when you're done with it, tell me what you think. I want to hear about it. I'm like, okay. So, I go home and I devoured, it's not a terribly long book. I mean, it's relatively comprehensive as far as like modern day Wicca at the time. And, I started chatting with him. I said, some of the practices, they make a lot of sense. I mean, this was my first exposure to any idea of more than one. And this idea of, at the time, this understanding of like prayer and, achieving things through prayer. Coming in a different format other than Christianity or, something like that. And oddly enough, Russ was the high priest of a group in New Orleans called Star Serpent. The high priestess, Rhiannon Cotter, a wonderful woman, was his partner, and, they were running a coven, and they had teaching opportunities, and he asked me if I wanted to study. And I said, sure, why not? This sounds neat. Yeah, what the hell? So he invites me over, and we have tea, and, they ask all the questions and everything else. And I ended up practicing with Star Serpent for, gee whiz, I can't even remember how much time. I mean, it seems like it was somewhere between 3 and 5 years worth of going through that process. And I got just up to the point where I was about to make my first degree initiation. And then a lot of interpersonal things came up. A lot of theological things came up for me. A lot of the things that I talk about now in my ministry as far as like this, it's just really within my person about taking a stand against dualism. this kind of like black and white idea of truth, like this either or thing. And a lot of that didn't sit well with me. And there was some people at the time that were leaving the coven, and I decided that would have been a good time for me and my then wife to leave. So we made a break from the coven, and we were like floundering around for a bit, and we were trying to like be religiously observant as good pagan folk. And but what we were looking for was something with a little bit more order. So each person took it upon themselves to like go out and research on the newfangled thing at the time, the internet, to find something that we could put our energy into that had a little bit more structure. And the thing that I brought to the table was Armagnac Fane. This is around 95, 96. Yeah. So that was my first exposure to paganism, was that happenstance little bit through getting paid for martial arts lessons.
Yeah, when he's like, let me get back to me on this. Like, oh yeah, there's like, something. What?
Okay, you're up to something, Russ. And sure enough, he was.
So, how long after that did you join ADF?
I first joined ADF in 1997, and that was, we actually like downloaded all the things at the time when a lot of it was free. You know, we downloaded a bunch of stuff. That's when this is before the clergy training program as we know it now was in existence. That's back when they had the what they called the Super Druid program, which only one person made it through, Reverend John Adelman, Fox.
Yeah.
He was the only person that made it through the Super Druid program. But I was hell bent on doing it. I'm like, I could do this. Gee whiz, this is fantastic stuff. The Dedicant program had just been released in the first issue of Oak Leaves that I got. I think it might have been in like Oak Leaves 1. And that's when I was exposed to the Dedicant work. And, you know, it said that you could start a group, a proto-grove and all this. So I was, you know, me and my then wife and another friend of ours, Nick Holton, we started to really go in and look about and see what this was all about. And we were moving forward in the direction of starting a proto-grove and kind of getting into this. But a lot of my practice and a lot of what, how it evolved into devotional polytheism came from that first exposure to ADF. So, yeah. Now, to be transparent, I was not an ADF member straight through from 97 to now. There was a long time, 10 to 12 years in between there, that I actually broke away from ADF. My then wife and I got a divorce. I ended up moving away from New Orleans. I was living in California, teaching martial arts and teaching school at through the Orange County Department of Education, their environmental science school. And I actually got away from a lot of religiosity. You know, I was kind of floundering about for quite some time and spiritually seeking for 10 years, trying to find something of worth. You know, I was very judgmental, to be honest, in the late 90s, early 2000s toward you know, my sibling pagans, as it were. The thing that I always used to tell people is that, you know, if we were blessed with abundance, as pagans, we would rather spend the totality of that abundance on, and my shtick was the eye tooth of Aleister Crowley, and we'd like to put that eye tooth of Aleister Crowley in some kind of bell jar and keep it on a shelf somewhere just to look at and dust off every now and again, instead of giving even a tenth of that to our covens or to our, you know, circles and churches, as it were, to help sustain our religious leaders so that they can actually devote their time to full-time clergy. So in that's when I got turned on to, there's a series of articles done in a now defunct magazine called Fireheart that I believe was put out by the Earth Spirit Community, which is Andres Corbin Arthen's group, and it was their publication. And it was Judy Harrow, it was Isaac, and two other then pretty big name pagan authors having this roundtable discussion on paid clergy, on professional paid pagan clergy. Now, of course, Isaac was very all about this, you know. But that's always fascinated me with ADF, was this constant, in their quest for excellence, how to legitimize us, like really how to make the job of a pagan priest like a legitimate thing, just as any rabbi would be, just as any Catholic priest would be. And that really fascinated me, you know, because I've been someone that's had, I've had vocation since I was a boy, growing up Catholic. I was groomed going to Catholic school, the whole thing, doing the altar server stuff, and like I wanted to be a priest. Like, I didn't want to, like, you know, some kids want to be a fireman, some kids want to be, you know, a police officer or a whatever. You know, when we played, at the time, it was, you know, savvy to play, quote unquote, cowboys and Indians, you know. So some of my friends were the, you know, on the Indian team, and some of my friends were on the cowboy team. And I was Padre Guillermo, who would, you know, go and help the poor, you know, cowboys that the Indians took, and that would help the poor Indians that the cowboys took. And so that was, man, that was me as a kid, just so weird. So, but yeah, I've always kind of come to paganism in this sense of vocation, you know, in the Latin, like voca, like you are called to something, right? Mm-hmm. Like you hear a call to serve.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, yeah, exactly. So how long did it take for you to I know you decided you want to be a priest, but how long did it take you to actually go through your the ADF clergy program to actually be a priest?
Mm-hmm. So during that time away, the dark ages, as it were, in my experience, I ended up going through auspicious circumstance, actually. I ended up in Boulder, Colorado, going to Naropa University, and there I got a degree in religious studies with a minor in contemplative psychology. And while I was there, my mother passed, and I was studying very intently, not only you know, different religions and whatnot, but one of the main religions that I chose to focus on, because it was a great resource for it in Boulder and at Naropa, was Judaism. I was blessed to be able to be a student of Rabbi Zalman Schachter Shalomi of blessed memory. Reb Zalman, as he's known to a lot of his folks. And Reb Zalman, just the way that he spoke of religion, and it was his religion, you know, I mean, it was his Judaism. Very much like our Druidry, you know. Yeah. There's your Druidry, there's my Druidry, and together, if we're in the same room, it's our
Druidry. Yeah, exactly.
And he had a very similar approach to how he would come to Judaism and how he spoke about it, and it was just magical. I mean, he grew up in Europe, and he just escaped the pogroms and just all the horrors that came with the Holocaust and all the things. And he was a contemporary of Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, who essentially, if you don't know Reb Shlomo, he single-handedly almost rewrote the sounds of Jewish praise music. And they were contemporaries at yeshiva together, right? Mm-hmm. So to hear these stories from this venerated elder of any religious practice, you know, really gave me an opportunity to find beauty in religion once again. And while I was at Naropa, I was on the path to Jewish conversion. I fell in love. I fell in love with it. You know, Catholicism taught me that religion was real. Judaism taught me that you could find joy in religious practice, because when I started going to shul, it was all sung. Everything was music. It was all music, and I never experienced that. So, like, every prayer, like even the same prayers, if it was a sorrowful time, they had a sorrowful tune that went with that prayer. If it was a joyous time, they had a joyous tune that went with that same prayer. And it really taught me how to find joy in that religious experience. But like I said, my mother passed, and, you know, I went to, you know, I was covering my head, and I had the beard, and I was going to synagogue and doing all the things. And when my mother passed, you know, people gathered around me, and we said the prayers of mourning, you know. And I was in the middle of the prayers of mourning with all the people, like, holding me, and I was just weeping because I just lost my mother and all the things. And there was still something missing. Like, I didn't know what to do with my dead. You know what I mean? Like it wasn't like this, like, they transcended, they went to heaven, it's super swell. You know, it's like, no, there's more than that. And I was feeling like something was missing. And that's when I got back into my ADF practice. That's when I started to like really go back and reread the things, because then, you know, like I was trying to figure out, like, well, what do I do? And the things that felt natural were to light those candles and to have that picture and to make offerings to my dead. So I think around 2009 is when I got back into ADF. And to get back and answer your original question, thank you for your patience.
Yeah, no worries.
I guess it took me about a year to get through the Dedicant program. And then it took me about another 6 months to a year to get through the preliminary clergy training. and then about another year after that to get through CTP1.
Oh, so you did pretty quickly.
I did it in about 3 years. Yeah.
That's about the average time.
Well, which, I mean, if you were looking at it, like, this is after my bachelor's degree,
Mm-hmm.
so if you're looking at it like advanced studies, some kind of advanced study program, postgraduate kind of thing, I mean, it took me about the time that most folks would take to get a master's degree.
That makes sense. I think that's why they planned it that way. They don't want you to do it in a year.
Right.
Now, you mentioned ministry.
Mm.
And you don't hear that very often in paganism, and you don't really hear that often in ADF. So
Right.
a lot of clergy people have a grove that they're part of, and they do clerical stuff with the grove. But you're saying a ministry. So what sets your grove in a ministry versus everybody else? So what makes what you're doing unique?
Okay. So the way that I've looked at it, and again, I'm just one cat, right? I'm just one priest. The way that I've always looked at this is that there is a primary modality of ADF priesting, and the term that I use is fire priest. Kirk likes to use the term temple priest. But these are the people that like uphold the old bargains, that uphold the ways, that uphold these arrangements and promises that we made long ago with the gods, to burn the right things, to light the fire at the right time, to, all these types of
Like
things.
the Frashina ritual we just did.
Exactly,
Yeah,
which is a magnificent ritual.
Oh, thank you.
You're very welcome. But there's a certain degree of that, and there's a tremendous amount of skill that goes along with that. I'm an okay fire priest. I'm a good enough fire priest, and good enough is good enough. But the thing that I'm called to is I'm called to a lot of work that involves human beings and not necessarily the kindreds as the privileged group. I tend, and not as a humanist would, but I tend to put human beings in that equation as well. And I call that work the work of a folk priest. And in the work of a folk priest, you have an agenda. And that's really what a ministry is. It's sacred agenda for the benefit of others. And I think that's one of the things that I have, and, with that definition, you could say that other priests have a ministry as well, and their ministry is a fire ministry, a temple ministry. Mine is a folk ministry. Mine is the interest and caring of the people. And what appears in a ministry? Well, it's a lot of the similar themes that show up that give us the core cosmology, that give us the realm, whether that's an upper realm or a lower realm or wherever, but there's a realm of the dead. There's a realm of the gods. There's a middle realm where the unseen and seen things of this realm kind of work together. And there's certain inspiration that comes from being aware of your cosmos, and it's those inspirations that you bring to the folk, and that's what a ministry is created out of. I don't know if other ADF priests are doing that. I also, because of my religious studies degree, I do tend to use a lot of terms that aren't necessarily neo-pagan specific, that are more general religion specific. So, but I find that kind of helps me move through a lot of more ecumenical circles when you're talking to like other priests or other religious professionals, that when you use that same language, that it's not as weird.
Yeah, because some
Like
of the
if
stuff
you
we
roll
use is kind of weird, and like they look like you're like, huh? What is that?
Right, like if I rolled up, in like a big white robe, and I'm like, I'm the Druid of Boulder, I mean, like to them it would sound kind of silly, but it's like, no, I'm a pastor that serves Boulder County, and right now we're growing a church, and right now, because they're familiar with terms like home church, and that's kind of what we're working. Like we're working to build something that is greater. We are, God's be good, working toward some sort of actual building that has land that we can care for our dead in our community.
Would you mind talking a little bit about because I know you and Missy are working on creating this type of model. I know you're kind of in the planning stages. Do you mind talking a little bit about that? Because it's very unique.
Sure. One of the things that I think that we do differently is that we privilege our local experience over more traditional Indo-European hearth culture experiences. For example, like you have a Roman hearth, right? So a lot of how you interact with the rest of the world is informed by the historical precedent, the historical information that we get, archaeological data that comes from the Roman world. Because we want to keep things very local and find commonalities in that, sometimes it's off-putting. Like if we did a rite to Jupiter, okay? Nothing wrong with Jupiter. Nothing wrong with the blessings that Jupiter gives to his followers. Nothing at all. But we found that if you stand in front of the fire and you say Jupiter, if there's people at your fire that are Norse, if there's people at your fire that are Vedic practitioners, if there's guests at your fire that are normally Christians that just want to find like this other thing, it comes off as, oh, this is a relationship with a specific being, right? And most of these names, like Kirk said in some of his lectures, these names were titles anyway, right?
Right.
So, like, the Tyr, Zeus, Jupiter, all these things, Diospater, if you're going to go back to, like, assumed Proto-Indo-European name, these are just all titles. And essentially, that title can boil down to some sort of shining sky father. So when we call out to the sky father that is in our local area, we look to, well, where would the sky father live? We could look up in the clouds. There's probably, like, some kind of place of resting for the sky father, some kind of home. Luckily, where we are in Colorado, if we look to the west, we see what's known now as Long's Peak. Long's Peak, from where our vantage is, looks like these two twin mountains. The First Nations people of the area called it the Twin Guides, because when they would travel between the mountains and the plains, when they were on the plains, and if any sort of like storm fronts or came in or whatever else, when they looked to the Twin Guides, that was the direction that got them home. Also, the early like French trappers and things like that were coming to Colorado for like hunting and fur trading and things like this, they called them the twins as well. Mm-hmm. So that's where our gods live. Our gods live at the highest point in our local area. So when we call out to a sky father deity, we use the language that all the people, I mean, we're all in America, and the majority of us speak English as our primary language, at least the people who show up at our fire. And when we call to sky father, that gives an invitation so that if John Levy is at our fire, mm-hmm. that means when we say, blah, 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 sky father, you, from your heart, connect to Jupiter.
Yes.
Right?
Exactly.
And Jupiter is there. Someone who is a Norse practitioner would connect to like an Odin or Tyr character. To me personally, I don't have a hard Indo-European hearth culture relationship, but I do have a hearth culture relationship, and that's with the deities of that local area. And not the deities that were always there, because I don't think that's how deity works, but that's a whole theological discussion. I'm welcome to come back and talk more about that.
That would actually be excellent.
But I think that's what makes us different, is that we use terms and we use these titles in such a way that invites people, no matter what hearth culture they may be, even beyond those Indo-European hearth cultures. There are people that join us at our fire that are from Kemetic practices, the Egyptian practices. There are people that come to us that practice more African diasporic religions. But when we say like the sky character, the sky father, everyone can look to the highest point and have that instant relationship because it's in a language we understand, and it's inviting them to come in through a door of a shared door, which is the shared door of that language.
See, I really like that because that does make it for everybody.
Right.
And we've noticed within Columbia's rituals is that, I'm Celtic, so I will only go to the Irish Celtic stuff because I don't know these other deities. And that has caused some issues. I'm like, you don't have to believe in these specific gods. These aren't the only gods coming in. There are times to offer your own, but I think it's hard because what we're doing, what ADF is doing, what you're doing is a newer concept within paganism.
Absolutely.
And, real quickly, I know that I went to your Fourth Kindred workshop, and could you talk just for a little bit about your social justice work as well?
Sure.
Cool.
We started calling it the Fourth Kindred because, in a lot of devotional polytheism, which if we look at what ADF is, I mean, that's what we're doing. We're doing devotional polytheism. There's a tremendous amount of focus on the gods. There's a tremendous amount of focus on our ancestors. There's a ton of focus on the spirits of land and place. And there's not a lot of room, like in other religions, if we look at Buddhism, if we look at Christianity, if we look at a lot of these other modern religion expressions, there's a place where there's a place to put what is inspired through our religious practice toward humanity, right? There's a lot of compassion in Buddhism. So, like in Thich Nhat Hanh's practices, there's a ton of social justice. I mean, it started back in Vietnam. But there's a lot of concern about humanity and how our religious practice inspires us to engage humanity as sacred, right? There's not a lot of that in devotional polytheism. When we start looking at how to engage humanity, there's a lot of, we got to pay attention to the gods. And if we're right with the gods, then everything will be cool with humanity. Maybe. is my answer. I can't definitively say. I know that if I pray for someone's peace, that may or may not come, and that may or may not come in a way that they need or want or whatever. But if I pray for clarity and then I see someone in need and I go to help them, then I could actually engage them as a sacred being, right? So humanity becomes that fourth kindred. Some people try to put humanity and human beings into, just dwellers in the middle realm and everything else. It's like, well, yes, and I think that, like, if we look at our Cosmos sigil, and Ian calls it the Hall of Lu, the diamond-shaped little bit in there. I think what we know of as the existing middle realm dwellers, the land whites, all this type of thing, the spirits, our animal kin and all that, they dwell on the lines. Humanity, because we have choice in a lot of things, we dwell in that middle space. And it's just a consciousness toward those spaces where a standard ADF consciousness doesn't necessarily fall. So really, I would hope, Gods be good, I guess I'll find out later when I'm dead. But I hope that when I, meet Isaac in the afterlife, that we can have a conversation and that he can look at me and say, hey, thanks. Thanks for taking it to a place that, I never thought of or that we never really engaged in. Because that's what I want religion to do for me, and that's what I hope in sharing ministry, in sharing how the cosmology really affects us as people, what that does for us. So the idea of that fourth kindred is to give devotional polytheists a place that we can take our more traditional practices and have those inspire and awaken things in us so that we can re-engage humanity again.
And I liked in your workshop about talking about equality and cultural appropriation too, and actually saying how equal truly are we.
Right.
And that was actually, when you did that exercise, you might explain just real quickly, because you probably explained the whole when we're in the line.
That's an exercise that I was first introduced to when I first started in Europa. It was during like the, what do they call those? When you start something and, what's the word I'm looking for? Like introduction classes or some kind of like welcoming classes or
orientational classes.
Orientation. That's the exact word I was looking for. So when I was going through my orientation, Naropa, because it's its own culture, I mean, it's a Buddhist-inspired university and not a Buddhist university. It's a Buddhist-inspired. So one of the practices is a lot of social justice work and a lot of social and like human rights work in Buddhism. So one of the things that we did is we all lined up in a line and they would just start asking questions. If your parents went to college, take one step forward. If you ever had to work at a fast food restaurant, take one step back. And it just kind of showcases, because we're all in the same place, right? So we're kind of like equal, big air quotes, equal, right? But when we start answering these questions, we see that our life experiences define who we are. I mean, we always say that, your experiences define who you are. So when we actually look at what that looks like in physical space, because we want to think we're all equal and on the same tier, but once we start moving, we see that there is a huge amount. And in this workshop that we did this weekend, I mean, predominantly the people in there were a room full of white people.
Yes.
And that's cool, right? But even then, we assume that we're on this even playing field. But we saw that there were people, after these series of questions were asked, that there was a lot of privilege in the room. And not privilege like, better than or whatever else. It's just that opportunities for growth and change and things like this were easier for some people to access than it is for other people to access. And that's all it is. It's not like you're bad for it. We're not putting those binary judgments. We're not saying good and bad. It's just experiences, okay? So in that, once that was done, we see that there's quite a spectrum of privilege. And some people who answered these questions in a certain way and who answered these questions in other ways, while at one moment they were standing shoulder to shoulder, at the next moment, at the end of the exercise, they were an entire room apart from one another.
Yeah, it was quite upsetting to quite a few of us, especially within our grove. And it's hard to see that. And I'll admit this. I was probably the furthest ahead of privilege.
Sure.
Because of my background. So I'm, the front, and I saw a lot of my grove mates were towards the back, and I'm like, oh crap. And that opened up something for me. It's like, I have a hard time now I see this, now I understand things, I can understand why things happen now, and why emotions are happening a certain way, And now I realized, oh, wow, now I'm even more disconnected.
Mm.
And you and Missy were like, I started kind of freaking out a little bit, like, oh my God, now I'm farther away from them.
Right.
And now what can I do? What can I offer? How can I have an equal playing field to them? I'm trying to figure this out. We're working this out, and I realized I created the Grove because I'm able to. I have the time. I have the money. Whereas I can't speak for the whole Grove members, but they don't have the time. They didn't have the money. They're not in a place in their life where they could give up, 20-something hours a week planning, whereas I can, which is just what was a big eye opener.
Absolutely. The whole thing about privilege is that we want to be able to see that it exists, because if we're constantly thinking nothing's wrong and that everything is equal, then nothing will actually change. Okay. So when we realize that we have privilege, then we start falling into that obligation in the same way, like you say, that Roman citizens of wealth were obligated to make sure that the temples were built, to make sure that things were taken care of for like civic festivals. It's the mystery of Fehu. If you're a rune reader, you are blessed with wealth and abundance of cattle, in this case. They didn't take the cow from the poorest, the people who didn't have for the great feast for the people. The person who had the most was expected to give back. And that's what we're doing with privilege. While we don't have like a bunch of cows, and it's like, oh, here's a cow. This translates differently in modern paganism. So it's the advantages that we have. So if we find ourselves with a tremendous amount of advantages because we've been blessed with abundance, then it is our job as an abundant being to find those that do not share in that abundance and make sure that they are cared for. Not to your own detriment. This isn't like give away everything.
No.
This is, I have, so I'm obligated to make sure that others who don't have something.
Yeah. That makes perfect sense.
There's historical precedent for it. I mean, it's in the lore, it exists.
So we're just about out of time.
Okay.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? Anything else you'd like to tell our listeners about yourself or about the event or anything?
Sure. Fantastic event. I honestly think, I mean, it's very difficult to have something in the shadow of Mount Adams back here, on this amazing property that Kirk and Cozen have, that can't be life-changing, I mean, this is just such a remarkable physical place. But I honestly believe with the people that compose Columbia Grove, that this would have been the same event minus the setting. Because I think the people of Columbia Grove is what makes it. The tremendous diversity of experience, the diversity of just humanity, and how they come to the people that they serve, that's what makes this event. It's a magnificent group of people, and I certainly can't speak for Missy, but I can speak for myself and say that I feel very blessed to have been invited to this event, and have been able to touch people's hearts, and to just have great feedback, and to hear that the work that I'm doing isn't as weird as a lot of folks think it is, but it's actually appreciated. So, this was just a tremendous event, and I would drive across the country to do it again, to be honest with you.
And we would love to have you back, because that was fantastic. Well, thank you very much.
You're so welcome.
And we hope to get you back in on the show again.
You're so welcome.
And we're back.
All right, and we're going to go ahead and wrap things up for you. So jumping into the events calendar for September, September 18th is the Columbia Willamette Pagan Pride, and that's going to take place at Oaks Park from 10 to 5. On September 19th is the St. Helens Full Moon Circle from 8 to 10 p.m., located at the Yoga Union. That's YOUNION. And for just so you know, for each of these events, I'm going to go ahead and link the Facebook event so you guys can see that as well. On September 24th is the Celtic Fair, and that's going to be 10 to 5 at Chute Park in Portland, Oregon. Also on September 24th is the Autumn Equinox Bay Area Ritual. That's put on by the Proto-Grove of the Valley Oak, and that's going to be located in Santa Clarita.
Also on Saturday, September 24th, the Autumn Equinox Rite will be performed by the White Mountain Druid Sanctuary at Trout Lake Abbey in Trout Lake, Washington. That will be held, weather permitting, of course, in the Great Stone Circle there.
On September 25th, Columbia Grove is hosting our Dionysus Fall Equinox at West Hills Unitarian Universalist Fellowship in Portland, Oregon, at 3:30 p.m. And also on September 25th is the Fall Equinox Picnic in the Park at 12 p.m. in Battleground, Washington. That's going to be a busy weekend, it sounds like. And we have one item so far for October. On October 15th from 6 to 9 p.m. is Spokane's Wild Hunt Masquerade Ball, located at the Spokane Women's Club. And there will be a link for that. As a reminder, go ahead and email us at ptmpod@gmail.com if you're interested in having us talk about your event on our podcast. Last month, I believe somebody did email us, but it was after we had recorded, unfortunately. So I'm so sorry we weren't able to announce your event on our podcast. The minute you know that the minute you have information for your event, let us know, and we'll make sure we get it on our next podcast. And we do want to make sure we have that information out there for you guys.
And it's also for all you other ADF members out there who have groves that are doing events, other like grove festivals or anything like that. Please let us know. You could either send us information and we could say something about it, or you could record something like a 20-second to 30-second piece and we could play it on the podcast.
Absolutely. Finally, I would like to give a shout out to a new proto grove located in Eugene, Oregon. Congratulations, Twisted Root Proto Grove. We're happy to have you join the community.
Yeah, I'm actually going to go see them in a couple of weeks.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah. Yay.
All right, so closing stuff. You can listen to us on iTunes and Stitcher. Please subscribe, please review, please rate. That helps other people find us. You can also find us at our website, ptmpod.libsyn.com. And you can look us up. We have a fan page on Facebook as well as a regular discussion page. And I believe that's it. So let's do our thanking to Bridget and close out. Bridget, for your inspiration during this wonderful podcast, for your time spent with us, we thank you.
We thank you.
Wise one,
Brave one,
sure one,
strong one, we bid you now hail and farewell. Go by the powers that brought you, go by the unweaving spell. As thy bright pentagram stay, depart ere the circle is gone.